We love the idea of the struggle. We romanticize the late nights and the grind, but living it feels nothing like it looks in movies. I'm Dr. Abbie, a behavioral scientist, keynote speaker, and author. I use my background in psychology and my experience training elite professionals all around the world, including the US Secret Service, FBI, and Fortune 500 companies, to help you understand people, make better decisions, and take control of building the life you want. This episode is not about glamorizing burnout. It's about telling the truth about the path to success and what it requires, and why it feels different than what people expect, and why that's not necessarily a sign you're on the wrong path. And this episode might be a little controversial, but I want to give you a reality check. And we're going to talk about 3 lies that almost all of us have heard about success. Let's start with lie 1. People love an underdog. We've created a culture that loves the authentic of hard work, but not the reality of it. When I was fighting through my PhD, everybody doubted me. I kept hearing, "Wow, you're so ambitious," in that tone that you know what they really mean is be more realistic, lower your standards, stop aiming so high. And I was constantly told that my dreams were too big. And I lost friends because they didn't really support me in a real way. You know, you post that reel on social media and they're laughing behind your back, or you have everybody asking you for friends and family discounts instead of just supporting your business. But the moment that I was on TV as a young doctor training the FBI, suddenly the people who told me to be more realistic were the ones claiming they always knew I could do it. When you're working tirelessly but don't yet have any visible success, people rarely take you seriously. In movies and TV, people love an underdog, but in reality, it's much harder to find people that genuinely support you during that struggle. So if you do have someone supporting you while you build, hold on to them tight, because people usually do that journey alone. Lie 2 is that if you're on the right path, it should feel good. Most people imagine that once they commit to a goal, they will feel clear and motivated and powerful. But in reality, especially at the beginning, growth can feel very uncomfortable, and it can feel like you're working harder than ever but seeing very little change. When you push into an unfamiliar territory, your brain is going to register that uncertainty as threat, which is why growth can show up as anxiety and fatigue or doubt. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong path. Success is built by showing up long enough for the unfamiliar version of your life to become familiar. And something I've learned the hard way is that the turning point often feels like the breaking point. When you're working and pushing and everything feels exhausting, that's usually the moment you feel like you cannot keep going. And most people quit in that moment. But if you want something that not many people have, you have to be willing to push past the phase that most people give up at. This is not about encouraging burnout. It's just the honest truth about hard work being hard. To grow a muscle, you have to tear it. To be mentally stronger, you have to learn to keep going when everything inside you wants you to stop. And growth often feels uncomfortable before it feels rewarding. Lie 3. Balance is possible in the early stages. We hear so many messages about balance, but there is a difference between having a balanced life and having a balanced season. And the early season of building anything significant is rarely balanced. We only have a finite amount of time. When you're creating something new, the hours have to come from somewhere. What you give to one area, you take away from another. If you do not sacrifice for what you want becomes the sacrifice, because we cannot have everything at once. You cannot give the maximum amount of energy to every area of your life simultaneously. When you decide what you want the most, you also have to decide what you are willing to release for now. When I was 23, I became a professor of psychology whilst I was finishing the final year of my PhD. And the conditions of the role meant that if I did not complete my PhD within the first year, I wouldn't pass the probation period. I was also buying my first house and writing my first book. I could not manage everything at once and show up for the people around me. I didn't see friends or family. I just worked. And I needed that uninterrupted year of focus. And I'm not saying that is the right route for everyone, but for me, it was the road that allowed me to build what I needed to build. And to be clear, you can be very successful in a 9 to 5, but the input and the output are different. If you want to build something that's yours, something exceptional, the cost will never look the same as a predictable role. So no, balance is not always possible in the early stages of big goals. Someone out there will always be willing to sacrifice more time and more hours and more energy for their goals. If you want to be the one to come out on top, if you want to be the best at what you do, you have to be willing to sacrifice on your way to doing so. Big goals require big demands. So now we have covered the big lies, I want to give you some hard truths. Hard truth number 1, your circle will make or break your success. Your circle can either support your growth or quietly destroy it. And people underestimate this. They focus so much on strategy and effort and forget that the energy and emotion that you absorb from others has an impact. The people around you don't just influence how you feel, they influence what becomes normal. If they're constantly pulling you into drama or making impulsive decisions and avoiding responsibility, those behaviors slowly become part of your normal environment that you're trying to grow in. Even if you never consciously choose them, you are adapting to the standards around you. And the opposite is also true. Spending time with people who bring you stability and think about long-term goals and genuinely want to see you succeed, they make you feel like anything is possible. And progress becomes easier because you're no longer swimming against the current. Or you can take a different path entirely, which is the path that I took for most of my 20s. You can do it alone. I learned very early that no one was coming to save me. And I didn't have a healthy upbringing. I never really had a home that felt safe. And whenever I would reach out to people, I always ended up hurt or disappointed. So I stopped reaching. And I became very independent. But if I'm honest, that independence was not strength, it was mostly fear. I had learned that letting people close to me meant that I would get hurt. And I was terrified that the wrong person would pull me away from everything I was trying to build. And there are parts of that decision that I'm still glad I made. I needed that time to learn who I was and what I wanted and what I was capable of without depending on anyone. But I would be lying if I sat here and told you that doing everything alone was the key to my success. It was exhausting. I was carrying every problem by myself, making every decision by myself, and trying to build a career whilst also dealing with the emotional weight of having no one to lean on. My work did suffer because I was drained. And even though there were things that were going well, I was unhappy. And a lot of us confuse isolation with discipline. We believe that if we let people into our life, they could distract us. And yes, the wrong person can absolutely do that. But the answer is not to have no one. The answer is to choose better. The right people do not ask you to become smaller so they can feel more comfortable. They make your life steadier. So no, I don't think that success requires you to do life alone. I think it requires you to become very careful about who you allow to do life with you. Hard truth 2, you cannot grow without disrupting something. Growth is not just about adding new habits or skills. Real growth reshapes your priorities and your boundaries and even the way you see yourself. It will disrupt something, and often it disrupts relationships. Some people will not understand your ambition, and they will feel threatened by your change because it forces them to confront their own choices. And some will just quietly fade out of your life because their path no longer aligns. It hurts when the people you care about cannot walk with you to the next chapter, and it can feel like you're disappointing them simply for choosing yourself. But when your life expands, anything that cannot expand with it will naturally fall away, and you have to let it. Holding on to what no longer fits only creates friction that slows your progress and drains your energy. It is painful, but it's part of the process. And hard truth number 3, you're the one in your own way. The biggest barrier is often just you. It's your hesitation, your need for comfort, and the stories you tell yourself about why you cannot start yet. Anytime I say this, I always have people deflect back with, well, that's easy for you to say because you don't have XYZ. Easy for you to say because you're not neurodivergent. Which, by the way, I am. I am severely dyslexic. I've struggled with things that other people find very simple until I learned that my differences could become my strengths if I understood them properly. We all have things that hold us back. Either we learn how to use them to our advantage, or we lean on them as an excuse. And most people are not held back by ability. They're held back by the habits or the patterns that keep them exactly where they are. Because people avoid temporary embarrassment of learning something new, and they often avoid facing the parts of themselves that would actually need to change in order to grow. We tell ourselves that we needed to wait until we felt ready, but you will never feel ready. You can only be prepared, and there is a difference. It really comes down to this. You can stay where you are, or you can become the person you want to be, but you cannot do both. If today's episode challenged the way you think, please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. So until then, keep challenging conventional thinking. I'm Dr. Abbie, and I'll see you next time.